Good morning, all. If you can, please, let's take our seat so we can proceed with the next agenda, please. All right. Good morning, all. Peter Gunilli here with Expo. Without much ado, we'd like to proceed with our session keynote speaker. It is my honor to invite Mr. Thomas Healy, the founder and chief executive officer of Hyliion. Let's give him a warm round of applause.
Well, thank you all for having me here to chat a little bit about electrification. And some of you may be aware of Hyliion, some not, but my name is Thomas Healy, and I'm the founder and CEO of Hyliion. And we're focused on electrifying Class 8 semi-trucks. So I will bore you with a little background on the company and kind of what we do, but then the main focus of this is going to be sharing 5 staggering stats around electrification. I think all of you are aware this is going to be a challenging endeavor to try to go electrify this industry. But we want to put some context to that so that you have some numbers as to what it's really going to take to electrify a fleet. So the whole reason we're here, why we're bringing forward electrification, is because of climate change, right? We want to reduce how much pollution is out there. If that wasn't the goal, I think all of us would just say, let's stick on diesel fuel, let's just keep going forward and leave trucking as it's been for many, many decades. But the reality is the years ahead are going to be electrified. So the question is, well, how are they going to be electrified? So our solution at Hyliion is we do range extender electric powertrains. So that means, yes, it is an electric vehicle, but the difference is, as opposed to needing to rely on the grid to recharge the battery pack, we actually bring a generator on board the truck that recharges the batteries as you're going. So we'll come back to that in a little while, but this is what fleets really care about. These are the 3 buying decisions when they're looking at electrification that they weigh as to determining what solution they're going to buy. So it's cost, emissions, and infrastructure. Those are the 3 things. So as we go through these stats, you'll see kind of those 3 themes coming up again. So let's jump into stat number 1. So stat 1 is, you think about a BEV truck, the battery size that is actually needed is about 330% larger than what you probably expect. So let's break that down. So let's take a round trip. We go Boston to Providence and back to Boston. It's a 100-mile trip. You would normally think that you're going to need 2.2 kilowatt hours of battery per mile driven. Very widely accepted industry stat. So just a simple math means that you're going to need a 220 kilowatt hour battery pack. But if we start to break that down and actually think about some of the limitations that batteries face, so you start with 220 kilowatt hours, but then you need to remember that there are charge limits on battery packs. You don't want to charge them above 90%, and you don't want to charge them below 10%. So now you just increase your pack size by 20%. Similarly, if you have a round trip route, Boston to Providence, and you do that every day for the next 5 years, that's the load you're carrying, well, you actually need to size your battery pack based on the end-of-life capacity of that battery, not the starting life. So over the life of a battery pack, it's expected the capacity of that battery is going to decrease by about 30%. So now you just added another 30% capacity you need in the pack. Then you get into some other factors like weather and driver behavior. There's tons of studies done that actually show you that can impact a lot more than 20%. So we're probably on the conservative end, but let's call it 20% for this presentation. And then lastly is weight. When most OEMs actually go and classify how much range a vehicle gets, they're usually weighing the vehicles up to somewhere in the 60,000 pounds kind of a range, and that's how they calculate the range of the vehicle. So if you actually were to haul 80,000 pounds, now you actually need about 33% more capacity in your battery in order to do that same route. So what does this mean? So when you go spec a battery, there are some things that are guaranteed impacts. The degradation of the battery and the charge limits absolutely are an impact. So now you need an almost 400 kilowatt hour pack to do that 100-mile route. And then if you take into account the impacts that could happen, now you need close to an 800 kilowatt hour pack to do 100 miles. Most people would think an 800 kilowatt hour pack is like a 350, 400-ish mile sort of a battery pack, and that's not the reality. So for doing that one trip, you now need a battery that normally you would think of as being a battery that could do 330 miles. All right, so that's stat one. So now let's jump forward into stat two. So if you plug in 10 BEV semi-trucks to recharge them, that is going to consume the same amount of electricity as the Super Bowl stadium consumes. So let's kind of dive into how do we get there. So the proposal with trucking is we're going to use 1 megawatt chargers. These are massive chargers, high rate chargers. So that's where we're heading though, is 1 megawatt. So if you take 10 of these vehicles and plug them in, you're going to be consuming 10 megawatts of power. So what does 10 megawatts actually equate to? So 10 megawatts is about 8,000 homes. To put it in a different term, it's about 10 large hospitals. Or similarly, it's equivalent to 1 Super Bowl. All right, let's jump forward to stat number 3. EV charging infrastructure will cost about 1.5 times the upfront cost of what the initial purchase price of vehicles costs. So this data is extremely difficult to get, because it's all new deployments. But this is actually anecdotes that we've heard from fleets. So let's dive into that as to what the cost would really look like. So if you're a fleet, you go buy a new BEV truck, $450,000. So let's say you buy 50 of those trucks. That was what these fleets were looking at. It's going to be a $22.5 million upfront cost. We heard a fleet looking to deploy 50 trucks in Texas. They were quoted $30 million for the infrastructure costs to build out the chargers. We similarly heard the same thing trying to be done in California, and it was about a $40 million cost in order to set up that infrastructure. So let's break that down. That means a fleet's going to spend $22 million on truck costs, but they really actually have to spend $35 million in addition to that just to set up the infrastructure to actually recharge those BEV trucks. I think this is a factor that most people aren't considering when they think about actually buying these trucks until they get in front of their utility provider and they see the actual quote or the bill of what it's going to cost to deploy these vehicles. All right, stat number 4. If we do a 50-year look back on the electric grid, we have only seen a 3% increase in the amount of renewables on the grid. So most people think like wind, solar, hydro, it's skyrocketed, right, over the last however many couple of decades. The reality is it's been actually a very small shift. So if we look back 50 years ago, 17% of our electricity came from renewable sources. If we fast forward to where we were just a couple of years ago, it has only increased to 20%. So when everyone talks about, wind and solar is going to be the solution for these EV chargers, it's taken us 50 years just to get a 3% increase. Now, there have been some good shifts. The top box where you see 14% in 71, that is petroleum-based power plants. We've reduced it now to just 1%. But you've also seen a significant increase in natural gas, right? You went from 23% natural gas to now we're at 38%. Much, much cleaner fuel than what some of the other fuels we used to use. But renewables has not seen a massive change. All right, and then stat number 5. So it takes up to 10 years to build out a new power plant. So if we start right now, that means it's not going to be until 2033 until new power plants are coming online. So as all of you are aware, we're here in 23. The emissions standards that fleets are getting forced to comply with really start coming into place in 2027. So that means that it would have needed to have been back in 2017 when we started building new power plants or starting the commissioning process, starting to make the proposals to build these power plants. That would have needed to start 6 years ago. And the reality is, if you actually look at the data that's out there about how much grid electricity, the total US capacity of grid electricity, we are actually decommissioning power plants. We are actually decreasing the amount of available electricity that there is out there. It's a slight decrease, but it is heading in the wrong direction. So with that, we're behind the 8 ball. Everyone's expecting that within just a few years, there's going to be this mass adoption of BEV plug-in vehicles. And the reality is the power plants would have needed to have been started a long time before that. So obviously that was a lot of doom and gloom of like these crazy stats of how are we actually going to adopt electric vehicles. So let's talk about what are some of the practical solutions that are out there. So this is how we see the market breaking down. We see there's going to be two different types of electric vehicles. You're going to have the BEV plug-in solutions, which are going to be that gray box. And then the green and the blue boxes are range extender electric solutions. Now, our belief as a company is we think that range extender are going to start by utilizing natural gas and specifically renewable natural gas. And then over time, we're going to evolve into hydrogen. Hydrogen isn't ready there yet either today, other than in small deployment applications. So that's going to take time to build out. But the nice thing is that renewable natural gas is actually there and ready now. But the question still remains of, well, how are you going to actually charge those plug-in ones, those 100, 150, maybe up to 200-mile trucks? So that's where one of the big announcements we had at the trade show this week was we are going to be moving into the stationary power generation applications as well. So our thought was, well, what if we could actually have the same power plant or the same generator that could go both in the vehicle to charge the batteries as you're driving down the road, but could also be used in stationary applications. And that's what the Keynote generator is. It's this fuel agnostic solution that could power your EV plug-in vehicles as well as go in the vehicle. And the great thing with it, though, is that when you think about the actual cost of electricity, we're projecting to be at about 7 cents per kilowatt hour of producing electricity on board or with this Keynote generator when utilizing natural gas. If any of you have gone out to your utilities to get quotes on what these 50 truck deployments, the 30-something million dollars I mentioned before, you probably realize that they're quoting you saying we're going to charge you your peak charging rates. That's how you're going to set your cost per kilowatt hour. And if you're in California, like where we are today, chances are more is going to look like somewhere in the 30 cents per kilowatt hour, as opposed to if you can make your own electricity with a Keynote, you'll be down sub 10 cents. So what does that mean in terms of applications from a stationary power generation standpoint? The opportunities are really endless, right? If you think about the grid today, it's a model where you have your power plant and then it's going to distribute power out to the end locations where you need it. If you flip that model on its head and you actually can produce the electricity locally, let's say this convention center could actually be making its own electricity. Now you're going to be feeding electricity back into the grid. And this is what a distributed grid is, right? It means that a convention center makes its own electricity. When there's excess, it pumps it back into the grid. When you're at a deficit, then you pull from the grid, and potentially you're pulling from a hotel that's down the street that is making its own electricity as well that has excess. So as we looked at what are the applications for this? So data centers, huge opportunity. Electric vehicles, also, obviously also another big one. Cities need more electric generation. You could actually put Keynotes in those buildings and produce power locally, as well as applications like marine that you see on the left-hand side use the same generator to produce electricity there as well. So as we move forward, we think that a distributed grid model is really where this industry is going to head. And we think that if you can use the same technology both in a vehicle and for actual grid applications, that's going to allow you to take advantage of commodities of scale. So with that, EVs aren't the problem. It's really the infrastructure that is going to be the challenge that fleets are going to face over the years ahead. All in the next decade here, you're all going to have opportunities to buy these trucks, but I would encourage you to actually go have the conversations with your utility providers, where they will probably, as one utility provider or one fleet shared with me, he got laughed out of the room at his utility because he was asking for an amount of electricity that just simply wasn't available, and they had never had to even consider deploying to a warehouse before. So with that, I appreciate you guys taking the time to hear some staggering stats of where this industry is heading and how it's going to shape up and what electrification is going to look like over the next couple of decades here. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. That was very informative. Thanks again. Let's give him one more round of applause. All right. Just in case you don't know, for our registered attendees, all the slides from today's workshop will be available through the app. So feel free to download. All right. Coming up.